What if the most dangerous moment in a civilization's life is not when it is weak, but when it feels secure? What if collapse does not begin with chaos, but with calm? History teaches us to fear instability. We imagine decline as riots in the streets, failing economies, foreign invasions, visible cracks. But what if those are not the causes, only the symptoms? Look closely at history, and a strange pattern begins to appear. Some of the greatest civilizations did not fall when they were desperate. They fell when they were stable. When their borders were secure, economies strong, institutions mature, citizens believed the system would last forever. Stability feels like success. It feels like proof that the system works, that the problems have been solved, that the hard battles are behind us. But stability has a hidden effect. It slows adaptation. It reduces urgency. It replaces vigilance with routine. When a society becomes stable, it becomes predictable. And when it becomes predictable, it becomes rigid. Rigid systems are efficient until something changes. And something always changes. New technologies emerge, climate shifts, trade routes move, ideas evolve, enemies adapt. But stable civilizations often fail to notice subtle change. Because stability creates confidence, confidence reduces questioning, and reduced questioning creates blind spots. In moments of instability, societies are alert. They experiment, they reform, they adapt. In moments of long stability, they optimize, they perfect the current system. They reinforce existing structures. They reward conformity. They preserve what worked yesterday. But preservation can quietly become resistance to change, and resistance to change is where decline begins. This is the paradox. Instability is visible and frightening. Stability is comfortable and admired. Yet instability forces growth. Stability can freeze it. The collapse does not start when the empire is attacked. It starts when the empire believes it no longer needs to evolve, when success becomes assumption, when institutions become unquestionable, when the system becomes too confident in itself. And history shows us something unsettling. The longer a civilization enjoys stability, the more fragile it may already be. Because stability is not the opposite of collapse. Sometimes it is the prelude. If stability were truly a shield against collapse, history would look very different. But again and again, the pattern repeats. Rome did not fall when it was small and struggling. It fell after centuries of dominance. At its height, Rome controlled vast territories, maintained professional armies, engineered roads, aqueducts, and cities that symbolized permanence. Its legal system was refined, its bureaucracy organized, its economy integrated across continents. From the outside, Rome looked unshakable, yet beneath that stability, something subtle was happening. Military expansion slowed, political competition intensified, institutions grew more complex. Reforms became harder to implement. The empire was strong but also heavy. The same can be seen in the Han Dynasty of China. After long periods of consolidation and prosperity, centralized systems became deeply entrenched. Bureaucracies expanded, administrative structures hardened, court politics grew more rigid, the state functioned efficiently. But when external pressures and internal strains emerged, the system could no longer flex. It fractured. Consider the Maya civilization. For centuries, city-states thrived. Monumental architecture rose. Agricultural systems supported dense populations. Cultural achievements flourished. Yet prolonged success created ecological strain. Political rivalries intensified. Resource systems became overstretched. The cities were impressive, but the balance was delicate. Stability had masked accumulating pressure. And when the tipping point arrived, it was rapid. What connects these civilizations is not weakness. It is maturity. They had systems that worked. They had institutions that endured. They had identities rooted in continuity. And that is precisely what made adaptation difficult. The longer a structure survives, the more it resists alteration. The more resources invested, the more costly it feels to change it. Leaders hesitate to disrupt success. Citizens resist reforms that challenge comfort. Elites protect structures that benefit them. Stability creates stakeholders. Stakeholders defend the present, but history moves regardless. New military tactics emerge. Economic networks shift. Environmental conditions change. Technologies redefine power. If a civilization adapts quickly, it evolves. If it adapts slowly, it strains. If it refuses to adapt, it collapses. And stability often slows adaptation. Because stability convinces societies that the current model is sufficient, that no urgent change is required, that the system is proven. But the very proof of past success can blind a civilization to future risk. This is not a story of sudden catastrophe. It is a story of gradual rigidity. The pattern is clear. Civilizations do not collapse when they are weakest. They collapse when they have optimized a system for a world that no longer exists. Stability is not passive, it is engineered. It requires systems, rules, institutions, and habits that reinforce one another. When a civilization becomes stable, it does so because it has optimized its structures. Its tax system works. Its military hierarchy is disciplined. Its political order feels predictable. Its economy is coordinated. Efficiency replaces experimentation. Over time, institutions stop asking, what if they begin asking, how do we preserve this? This shift is subtle but decisive, because preservation is not the same as adaptation. When systems are new, they are flexible. They are built in response to immediate pressures. They are experimental, sometimes even unstable. But once they succeed, they solidify. Rules become formalized. Procedures become standardized. Positions become entrenched. Privileges become defended. And with each layer of formalization, change becomes more expensive. Stable societies reward continuity. They promote leaders who protect the system, not those who disrupt it. They value predictability over risk. They institutionalize routines that once solved problems. But problems evolve. An economic model that worked in one era may not suit another. A military structure designed for one threat may fail against a new one. A political system built for expansion may struggle during contraction. Yet stability convinces societies that past solutions are sufficient. This creates rigidity. Rigidity is not visible at first. It hides behind competence, behind tradition, behind long-standing success. But rigidity means that when new challenges appear, responses are slow. Decision-making becomes bureaucratic. Innovation is constrained by regulation. Reform faces resistance from those invested in the old order. And the more stable a civilization has been, the more deeply its identity is tied to its institutions. To question the system begins to feel like questioning the civilization itself. This psychological attachment strengthens rigidity, because institutions are not just functional structures, they are symbols of identity. Rome was not just governed by law, it was law. Imperial China was not just centralized, it was centralized authority. To reform deeply would mean redefining who they were. So they delayed, and delay, under pressure, becomes vulnerability. Stability makes change feel unnecessary. Rigidity makes change feel dangerous. But history does not pause for comfort, it moves. And when change accelerates, rigid systems crack. Not because they were weak, but because they were too optimized for a past that no longer exists. Every stable civilization eventually begins to believe it is permanent, not consciously, not through formal declaration, but through habit. When a society functions predictably for generations, stability becomes normal. Children grow up within institutions that have always existed. Laws feel timeless. Borders feel fixed. Currency feels unquestionable. What was once an achievement becomes an assumption. This is the illusion of permanence. It does not arise from arrogance alone. It emerges from repetition. When something works long enough, people stop imagining alternatives. Rome believed its system was eternal. Imperial China spoke of dynastic cycles, yet each dynasty assumed its own endurance. The Ottoman Empire called itself the Sublime State, convinced of structural longevity. Even in more recent history, powerful nations have treated their systems as self-sustaining. Stability generates confidence. Confidence reduces contingency planning. Contingency planning requires imagining failure, and imagining failure is uncomfortable in a stable society. Because stability creates psychological security. Markets are predictable, institutions function, infrastructure is maintained, public order holds. In such an environment, reform appears unnecessary. But beneath visible stability, pressures accumulate, demographics shift, economic imbalances grow, environmental stress increases, technological change accelerates. Yet stable societies tend to interpret early warning signs as temporary disturbances. Why? Because past crises were overcome. Because the system proved resilient before. Because stability creates faith in institutional competence. This faith is not irrational, it is built on evidence. But it can become blinding. When institutions have survived for centuries, they develop reputational gravity. They appear larger than individual problems. Criticism feels exaggerated, reform feels premature, and the longer stability persists, the stronger this inertia becomes. The illusion of permanence makes societies reactive instead of proactive. Changes are addressed only when unavoidable. Adjustments are incremental rather than structural. Leaders prioritize short-term equilibrium over long-term transformation, and slowly, the gap widens between the world as it is and the system designed to manage it. Stability masks that widening gap. From the inside, everything feels controlled. From the outside, fragility grows. Collapse rarely feels imminent to those living within a stable order. It feels improbable until it is not. The illusion of permanence does not cause collapse by itself, but it delays adaptation, and delay, in a changing world, can be fatal. Stability feels strong, it looks organized, disciplined, efficient, but strength and resilience are not the same thing. A rigid structure can carry immense weight until pressure shifts, then it snaps. This is the hidden tipping point of civilizations. When systems become highly optimized, they reduce redundancy, they eliminate inefficiencies, they streamline processes, they centralize authority, they cut excess. In stable times, this makes them powerful. But redundancy is not waste. It is insurance. Flexible systems tolerate shocks because they have alternatives. Decentralized structures adapt locally. Diverse economies absorb disruption. Highly stable systems often sacrifice flexibility for efficiency. They rely on tightly interconnected networks. Supply chains become dependent on precision. Political authority becomes concentrated. Economic flows become interdependent. Everything works as long as everything works. But when one node fails, the failure spreads. This is not ancient theory. It is structural logic. Consider late-stage empires. They often depend on extended trade networks, centralized administration, and professionalized institutions. These systems operate smoothly during stability. But when disruption hits, invasion, economic shock, epidemic, environmental shift, centralized systems struggle to respond quickly. Local autonomy has been weakened. Innovation has slowed. Decision-making is layered. Fragility reveals itself suddenly. The paradox is clear. The more stable a civilization appears, the more interconnected and optimized it becomes. The more interconnected and optimized it becomes, the more sensitive it is to disruption. This sensitivity remains invisible during calm. It is exposed only under stress, and stress always arrives. Climate change destabilized agricultural systems in ancient societies. Shifts in trade routes weakened once dominant cities. Technological change altered military balance. Stable systems are not inherently doomed, but they must continuously reconfigure themselves. When they do not, stability transitions into brittleness, and brittleness breaks abruptly. Collapse, from the outside, seems sudden. From the inside, it is cumulative. The tipping point is not a single event. It is the moment accumulated rigidity meets unavoidable change. By then, stability has already done its work. It has convinced society that adaptation is optional. But adaptation is never optional. It is constant. And when stability interrupts that constant adaptation, fragility replaces strength. This is why civilizations often fall at their peak, not because they lacked power, but because they mistook stability for permanence. Every stable civilization produces beneficiaries. Those who rise within the system, political leaders, military officials, wealthy merchants, high-ranking administrators, do so because the structure works in their favor. Their influence depends on continuity. Their power depends on predictability. Their status depends on stability. This is natural. No system sustains itself without rewarding loyalty. But here lies a structural problem. When change becomes necessary, those most capable of initiating reform are often those most invested in preserving the existing order. This is institutional inertia. In stable societies, elites rarely perceive themselves as obstacles. They see themselves as guardians. Guardians of tradition, guardians of law, guardians of economic order, guardians of national identity. From their perspective, stability equals security. Reform equals risk. And risk threatens the very structures that elevated them. So reform slows, warnings are debated rather than acted upon. Critics are marginalized. Structural weaknesses are reframed as temporary disturbances. Late Republican Rome provides an example. As inequality grew and political gridlock intensified, reform attempts met resistance from entrenched elites. The system that once allowed Rome to expand was no longer suited to its complexity. Yet meaningful reform threatened established interests, so compromise stalled. In many dynasties throughout history, bureaucracies expanded to manage stable governance. But large bureaucracies resist disruption. Procedures multiply. Accountability diffuses. Decision-making slows. Over time, the institution prioritizes self-preservation. This does not require conspiracy. It requires human nature. People defend what sustains them. In periods of instability, bold reformers can emerge. Crisis creates urgency. Urgency lowers resistance. But in long stretches of stability, urgency disappears. Without urgency, change appears unnecessary. Without visible crisis, systemic reform seems radical, and so, the structure persists. Until external pressures force rapid adjustment, by then, the window for gradual reform is closed. The civilization shifts from evolution to emergency, and emergency is rarely orderly. Elites are not the sole cause of collapse. But institutional inertia magnifies fragility. When adaptation becomes politically costly, stability hardens into stagnation, and stagnation weakens even the strongest civilizations. The irony is profound. The very people who built and maintained stability can unintentionally undermine its future. Because stability, once secured, feels too valuable to risk. Yet refusing to risk controlled change invites uncontrolled disruption. No civilization collapses in isolation. There is always a trigger, an invasion, a financial crisis, a drought, a technological shift, a pandemic. But the trigger is rarely the root cause. It is the test. External shocks do not destroy strong systems, they reveal hidden weaknesses. When a stable civilization faces disruption, its response determines its future. Flexible systems absorb the shock. Rigid systems fracture. Consider how external pressure exposed internal fragility in multiple historical examples. When Rome faced intensified migrations and military threats along its borders, the problem was not simply foreign invasion. It was administrative overextension, economic strain, and internal political instability already embedded within the system. The shock accelerated what was already underway. In the late Bronze Age collapse, powerful Mediterranean civilizations did not fall solely because of invaders. They were interconnected through trade networks and centralized systems. When disruption hit, the collapse cascaded across regions. Interdependence magnified vulnerability. The same structural pattern appears repeatedly. Stable civilizations often rely on complexity, complex trade routes, centralized governance, integrated economies, professionalized militaries. Complexity increases efficiency, but complexity also increases sensitivity. The more interconnected a system becomes, the more rapidly disruption spreads. A failed harvest becomes famine. A lost trade route becomes economic contraction. A military defeat becomes political crisis. In stable times, interconnectedness creates prosperity. Under stress, it accelerates breakdown. And because stable societies grow accustomed to smooth functioning, they often underestimate the speed of cascading failure. Collapse feels sudden, but it is the product of accumulated rigidity meeting rapid change. The external shock does not create fragility, it activates it. When adaptation has been delayed for too long, the system lacks the capacity to respond proportionally. Leaders react late, institutions respond slowly. Public confidence erodes quickly, and confidence is critical because stability depends not only on structure but on belief. When citizens lose faith in the permanence of institutions, stability weakens dramatically, markets falter, political unity fractures, authority becomes contested, the illusion of permanence dissolves, and once belief collapses, structures follow. This is why stability can precede rapid decline, not because stability is weakness, but because prolonged stability often conceals the gradual erosion of adaptive capacity. When the shock finally comes, there is no buffer left, only exposure. It is tempting to treat collapse as ancient history, to see Rome, the Maya, or imperial dynasties as distant lessons, impressive but irrelevant. But the structural patterns we've explored are not confined to the past. They are properties of complex systems. Modern societies are more stable than any civilization before them. Global trade networks span continents. Financial systems operate in milliseconds. Supply chains connect thousands of nodes. Governments manage vast populations with digital precision. From the outside, modern civilization appears remarkably resilient, but resilience and stability are not identical. We have optimized for efficiency, just-in-time production, centralized data systems, highly specialized labor, tightly integrated global markets. Efficiency increases output, but it reduces redundancy. And redundancy, as history shows, is what absorbs shock. Modern institutions also display institutional inertia. Large bureaucracies move carefully, reform is incremental, policy change is slow. Stability creates predictability. Predictability creates expectations. Expectations create resistance to disruption. This does not mean collapse is inevitable. It means adaptability is essential. History suggests that long periods of uninterrupted stability require conscious self-revision. Civilizations must periodically question their own assumptions. They must reform before crisis forces reform. They must tolerate experimentation even during prosperity. The paradox is clear. The safer a society feels, the more actively it must prepare for change. Because the most dangerous moment is not visible crisis. It is quiet confidence. When systems appear flawless, they are least likely to be re-examined. When institutions feel permanent, they are least likely to evolve. And evolution, not stability, is what sustains long-term survival. The lesson is not pessimistic, it is structural. Stability is an achievement, but it must be dynamic, not static. Societies that endure are not those that avoid disruption. They are those that adapt continuously even when adaptation feels unnecessary. History does not punish strength, it punishes stagnation. And stagnation often hides inside success. Civilizations do not collapse in chaos alone. They collapse in comfort. They decline not because they lacked strength, but because they trusted that strength too much. Stability is not the enemy. It is an achievement. It represents cooperation, order, coordination, and resilience. It is something societies fight for, protect, and celebrate. But stability is a phase, not a destination. When a civilization reaches stability, it faces a new challenge. Not survival, but because the longer a system functions smoothly, the more invisible its vulnerabilities become. Institutions harden, elites settle, citizens assume continuity, innovation slows, and change begins to feel unnecessary. History does not collapse stable societies out of cruelty. It exposes those that stop adapting. Rome did not fall in a day. The Maya did not vanish overnight. Dynasties did not shatter without warning. The signs were present, but stability muffled the alarms. The paradox is unsettling. Instability forces growth. Stability tempts stagnation. The most dangerous moment is not visible crisis, but quiet certainty. When leaders believe the system is mature enough, when citizens believe institutions are permanent, when reform feels like disruption instead of renewal, collapse is rarely the result of weakness. It is the result of delayed evolution. The world changes whether societies are ready or not. Technology shifts, climate moves, ideas spread, power redistributes. Systems that adapt endure. Systems that preserve without questioning fracture. Stability is not the opposite of collapse. It is the moment that demands the most humility, because strength without flexibility becomes brittleness, and brittleness breaks suddenly. The lesson of history is not fear, it is vigilance. Civilizations do not survive because they are stable, they survive because they remain adaptable, even during prosperity. The real danger begins when success convinces us that evolution is no longer necessary, and that is why stability, if misunderstood, can quietly become the beginning of collapse. If you find this kind of structural history valuable, not just events, but patterns, subscribe to Ancient History Secrets, because beneath every monument and every empire, there is a system, and understanding those systems is how we understand ourselves.